Well, seldom does a political adversary put the ball on the tee for his opposition to just hit it out of the park. But when President Biden baited Senator Mitch McConnell and congressional Republicans over their supposed lack of principles, remember he said, "I don't know what they stand for. They need to tell us what they stand for." It opened the door to what should have been an epic slapback. That, unfortunately, hasn't happened. Republicans have an opportunity to articulate an agenda that projects a vision for a stronger, freer America. Less drape measuring among the RNC and more specifics are necessary for Republicans to be the party that doesn't just win in November because the other guy lost, because the other guy fell down on the job, but earn a mandate that the Democrats failed to win in 2020. Now, that should start by pledging to address the secret resettlement operations administered by the Biden administration. The border crisis isn't staying on the border, folks. The guns, the drugs, the crime, and the increased cost to taxpayers over the administration's refusal to enforce the nation's immigration laws is reaching into every corner of the country. Right now, where you are, it is quite possible illegal immigrants are being dropped into your community without you or your elected officials knowing. The now infamous video of a resettlement flight that landed at Westchester County Airport has now become a symbol of the administration's abuse of power. What we saw there in the dead of night is part of a massive operation that is happening in secret in targeted areas all across the country that has cost, at last count, at least $300 million that we know of. And that's just the transportation, folks, not all of the other ancillary costs. During the Obama administration, illegals were resettled into more than a dozen states. President Biden is following his old boss's lead and increasing the reach of the resettlement program, though the details have been carefully hidden from the public. There are dozens of charter flights, hundreds of buses, thousands of bus tickets, and other methods for moving tens of thousands of illegal immigrants from border states into the interior of the United States. Local and state governments are in many ways power to stop it due to the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution. Federal law enforcement can transport and resettle illegal immigrants at will without notice or permission from states. But there's a solution. Republicans' new contract with America in 2022, and there should be one in my view, must include a pledge to pass legislation that prevents the federal government from transporting or resettling illegals and their family members into any jurisdiction without permission from the state and local government. Both should have to agree for illegals to be transported into any locality, whether they ultimately end up there or not. If the Congress can pass criminal justice reform legislation that impacts the activities of federal law enforcement officers and other federal officials' power in the states, they can pass legislation that protects communities from unwanted resettlements. Congressional Republicans should also commit to forcing full transparency on the targeting, the contracts, the communications, and the massive costs of the resettlement program. Federal legislation also must be passed to close loopholes in the U.S. refugee program to ensure that the left can abuse the system by classifying economic migrants as political refugees to excuse illegality. If those planes and buses carrying illegals are heading for Tennessee, Florida, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, or anywhere else, I think many of them are probably swing states, interestingly enough, the public has a right to know the government's rationale for choosing those locations, who made those decisions, how many individuals were transported, and who they are. America, folks, is not a democracy. I'm going to say it again. It is not a democracy. It's a republic in which states do not surrender their full sovereignty to the federal government. Fiscal coercion, political cowardice, and the brute force of Washington's regulatory might have stripped away state power over the last half century or more. But Republicans and other pro-freedom Americans can meet the high expectations for their performance this November by devolving power away from Washington and back to the states and citizens. And they should start by stopping President Biden's costly, dangerous, and damaging resettlement scam. There is absolutely no excuse not to tackle this with one voice, starting right now. It's a winning issue, and of course, it's the right thing to do.